We had a lady bring her daughter to the masjid. A non-Muslim lady
Okay.
brought her daughter to the masjid and said, I want my daughter to become a Muslim.
A non-Muslim,
non-Muslim lady.
Really?
Yeah, brought her daughter to the masjid and said, I want my daughter to become Muslim.
Yeah.
Because I want her to know right from wrong, and I want her to know like what is clear. Because Islam makes it clear.
Yeah.
And many of these young men, they say they're disciplined. You know, what is it that brings you to Islam? The discipline.
Imam Ashraf Dabus. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and
Wa
welcome
alaikum
to the
salam.
Thinking Muslim.
Barakallahu feekum for having me. It's an honor to be here with the array of guests that you've had prior to myself. Alhamdulillah, I'm blessed to join you.
No, it's wonderful to have you with us, and I think our listeners and viewers today will understand why we've invited you in to do this show. Now, Imam Ashraf, it is quite evident that there's been an uptick in the number of people converting to Islam in recent months. This was really noticeable, I feel, in Ramadan, where it seemed that every day a young man was given his shahada and becoming Muslim.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله.
I've invited you in today because I want to understand this phenomenon, if indeed it is one. Now, for those of our viewers who may not know you, Imam Ashraf Dabus is an Imam at Lewisham Mosque here in London. He studied at the Islamic University of Medina. He also studied privately under many scholars studying Hanbali and Hanafi fiqh, as well as other Islamic sciences. And he recently graduated from Goldsmith University with a master's in CBT therapy and is a qualified counselor. I would like to explore that maybe later on as well, inshallah. Imam Ashraf, thank you for coming in today. And I feel you can shed some light on this phenomenon of young men coming to Islam. Many of those viral videos I saw in Ramadan of shahadas came from Lewisham Masjid, which I know you are an Imam of, together with Imam Shakil Beg. And I'm going to link some of these videos in the show notes so that our viewers can see them. It was pretty noticeable that young men felt comfortable enough to come to the mosque and to embrace the deen. So I want to know what's behind this. Is there a noticeable uptick, and how can other Muslim communities replicate this? So let's start. There's a lot to get through today. And actually, it's really, for me, I'm surprised at what I'm seeing. I shouldn't be, but I'm pretty surprised at what I saw during Ramadan. And I want to get to the bottom of what's going on. You know, why is it that if there is this uptick, if there is a larger number of people becoming Muslim, what's behind that? So let's start from the top. Am I right here? Are we seeing more young people, British people, coming to Islam here in Britain?
Yeah, so 100% over the last, I would say, I think even going back before Ramadan, over the last few months, there's definitely been an uptake. And it's interesting because you mentioned young men. But it's actually young men and women.
Really?
But at Lewisham anyway, most of the women we don't record, and if we do, it would be like kind of like a camera close to the shoulder, so you don't really see the image of herself in the video.
Sure.
But there's definitely been an uptake, 100%, and it's been a range of ages. And I would suggest it's not only at Lewisham. I think it's been at multiple masajid.
Really?
So some of the masajid that I've been working in, other than Lewisham, so Lewisham I'm there most of the time, and I have like weekly classes at other masajid, and there have been shahadas there as well. And young people have been telling me, you know, sending me messages, calling me, this person wants to take shahada, where do they go to, things like that. So definitely there's been an uptake.
How many roughly in Ramadan, how many men and women became Muslim?
So in Ramadan alone, I would suggest maybe 60 to 70 young men and women.
Really?
And you mentioned there's been like a shahada video every day.
Yes.
But that's because we're like, you know, releasing them slowly.
Right.
But on one particular day we had 7 shahadas.
Mashallah.
Another day we had 11, which was prior to Ramadan.
Yes.
And it became like you kind of expect it. Some days someone will come in after Asr, I'd like to become Muslim. After Maghrib, I'd like to become Muslim. After Isha, 2, I'd like to become Muslim. And in fact, we had people attending the prayers and classes, and they weren't yet Muslim, and then taking their Shahada after 2 or 3 weeks. So definitely the case.
So when you say that they come in, so these are cold callers. They just come in from the streets and...
Yeah, so that, I guess it links to like why or how.
Yes.
And so definitely, I think the masjid has a role, a major role.
Yeah.
But I think the majority of the role of the spreading of Islam is found within the members of the community.
Really?
So the masjid perhaps develops the culture of calling others to Islam,
Yeah.
the culture of making Islam relatable to the community, the culture of being welcoming. For example, Imam Shakir would often give reminders about the importance of not judging those who come into the masjid, because you might have someone comes into the masjid, they've got tattoos, they're not dressed correctly. In some masajid, although now it's not really a big issue, but their hair's braided. A few years ago, for some of the elderly attendees of the masjid, that would be an issue.
Yeah.
And so there's kind of like a culture which is developed. Be welcoming. If you see someone that looks out of place, welcome them, make them feel comfortable. Don't judge them. And the importance of da'wah. And slowly the community start to speak to their neighbors, their friends, and they become Muslim. And I think the youth in particular, have had a major role,
Really?
Which I think we'll probably touch upon.
So these are youth from the local schools who come to your masjid, local
Exactly.
colleges.
Yeah, exactly.
So these are people they know at school and college who they interact with on a daily basis.
And sometimes the Muslim youth are not actually from the area.
Really?
But the individual is from the area. And so when you ask them, like, what is it that led to your Islam? They'll say, my friends.
Really?
Like young, and we're talking 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds, maybe even 13.
Serious?
Young Muslim boys and girls who are proud of their identity as Muslims. They're praying in school. They're kind of living as Muslims to the best of their capacity at that age. And these young men and women are taking note. And we've heard multiple times, multiple individuals have said similar things when asked, why is it that you're becoming Muslim? And they've highlighted certain points.
Yeah. So let's talk about causes then. So you've interacted with these people who embrace Islam. I mean, I saw it was amazing when I saw some of these videos of, I mean, for all Muslims, no matter how many times we see someone embrace Islam, it's still amazing, 100%, right? What reason? So you've said one reason is, their friendships. But what other reasons do these young men and women give when they... Are they young men and women, by the way, who are embracing Islam? I should have asked previously.
Yeah.
What's the age group of these?
So the youngest that comes to mind over the last, within Ramadan, 8 years old.
Wow.
Yeah, a young 8-year-old girl.
Yeah.
And the oldest, we've had individuals in their 30s. We've had someone, I believe she was in her 70s, perhaps.
Mashallah.
We've had a few, actually, yeah. And most recently, a young man, maybe not middle-aged, but like in his 30s, became Muslim. And a few weeks later, his mother became Muslim. She read the Quran like twice in English, and she became Muslim. And the young 8-year-old girl, her father became Muslim a good few years ago. And he's actually quite well known publicly because he's very active. I won't mention his name because I haven't asked his permission, but so he brought his daughter in because his daughter said, I want to become Muslim, Daddy, seeing him live his Islam. And she came in and I spoke to her and she was, like really intelligent. She took me aback. I was surprised at how intelligent she was because you would assume an 8-year-old, how can they make a decision like that? But sometimes maybe we don't give young people their due respect when it comes to their understanding of things in life. So we've had a range, young and old, if you want to use that term. But majority during Ramadan, definitely I would say young individuals.
And these are young individuals who largely came to your masjid because members of your congregation probably, have been making dawah at their school places and colleges, and or just through their example,
it's the example. So the best da'wah is the lived da'wah.
Really?
And that's what we see with these young people. It's like a few of them, they've said, I saw the way my friends were, kind, generous.
Right.
And a term that's come up very often, disciplined. We've heard disciplined a lot.
Really?
The prayer, I watched them pray and I decided this is the life for me.
Yes.
We had a school group come to the masjid and they were year 6s. So they were in year 6. And a young man, after the presentation, so we normally give a presentation on Islam, he said to me, I'm Muslim now. And I said, oh, when did you become Muslim? So I assumed he became Muslim a while ago. And he said, I just decided after listening to that talk that I want to be a Muslim.
Really?
This is the way for me. And I was like, I didn't know, should I take him seriously or not? So one of his friends in the class was a Muslim. So I called him over and said, look, he said he wants to become a Muslim.
Yeah.
You know, talk to him. And I told him, talk to your parents, things like that, because you have to involve the parents.
Yeah. I was fascinating when you said a 70-year-old lady embraced Islam.
Yeah.
She was old, she was elderly, she embraced Islam. Again, what lay behind her conversion? Did you get a chance to ask her?
So Imam Shakil was present for her shahada.
Yes,
And basically her son became Muslim.
Okay.
And through her son, you know, many of his friends actually became Muslim.
MashaAllah.
And a prominent individual actually became Muslim through that group as well. And he mentioned that some a celebrity's children were also responsible for his Islam as he grew up with them. And so he saw them living as Muslims, and that had an impact on him. And with her, they came from an area which was actually, you could possibly say, like, it was a known racist area.
Really?
Known racist area. And I mean, and that's a point to take into consideration. You know, like sometimes we build up these stereotypes, you know, like, and we allow the stereotypes, because stereotypes work both ways. You know, the non-Muslims have stereotypes sometimes, but we also develop these stereotypes. You know, if I see like, you know, a bald-headed, you know, muscular-looking white man, I might say to myself, oh, he looks like, you know, he's a racist. But is that actually the case?
Right.
And if I allow that thought to creep in, then I've already put up a barrier between myself and delivering him the message of Islam.
Yeah.
And so they came from an area which was known for being quite racist. And in fact, one of the individuals mentioned, he has family members that are racist, but they accepted Islam. You know, and so it's when people actually understand what Islam is. You know, if you think about Islam from the societal benefits that it brings, you know, many people don't know this. They don't know what Islam is. The only interaction they've had with Islam is what they see on their TV, or the echo chamber that is the internet, you know, or what they've heard, word of mouth, etc. And so when they actually come into interaction with a Muslim who's living his Islam or her Islam through their interactions, it takes them aback. You know, they're surprised, and they inquire, and many times they often kind of embrace Islam.
Yeah. Can I ask? I mean, maybe I'm way off here, but you know, Lewisham, for all of our viewers, and we have a lot of international viewers, but you know, they may not know the demographic of Lewisham. I mean, Lewisham is an area in London which I suppose they would call a deprived area. It's a very working class area. Socioeconomically, it's probably, you know, an area which is struggling. Lots of, you know, school attainment is probably poorer in Lewisham. Especially now with the cost of living crisis, you know, you would have a lot of poverty and food banks and these sorts of things in Lewisham. So has that troubled background, is that background context, does that play a part in these people embracing Islam? Like, they've got lives which are very chaotic and problematic, and they see Islam as being a better way of living for them.
So I think it's difficult to generalize, and I don't want to you know, come across as knowing the answer to the question really, without, because I think it would require maybe some research, you know, actually surveying, but perhaps there is an element of that, but I don't think it's the main kind of reason. And I think, so for example, if you look at Cambridge Central Mosque, I think they're having an uptake of individuals coming to Islam as well, and you can see that's a different demographic.
Very middle class.
Exactly. And so I think it's more the fact now that there's a new generation of Muslims who are very confident in their Islam, and maybe they don't have this mentality, you know, where it's like we're guests here, you know, so it's like they live their Islam and they see that as their right, and they see that as their identity. Like, I'm a Muslim, I'm British, yes, but I'm a Muslim first. And so living that and having that confidence, I think, is exposing everyone else to Islam. Although there was a young lady, she came to the Masjid, and she said she wanted to become Muslim. So I went out and spoke to her, and I asked her, what is it that's like brought you to the Masjid? And she said, you know, when I walk past the mosque, I see the love and the like everyone's hugging each other, And I was walking towards my car 2 Fridays ago, roughly, or 3 Fridays ago.
Yeah.
And there was he looked homeless, to be honest. And he looked like he was slightly drunk. I mean, he had a can of beer in his hand.
Yeah.
And I was like walking fast. So I startled him. Like he jumped and turned around and like grabbed his chest. So I apologized and we started speaking. And he said, oh, you from the mosque? I said, yeah. And he said, you know what? There's a real positive energy that I get from that place. Whenever I walk past, I see everyone together and shaking hands and hugging. After Jum'ah, that's what they're going to see. And so, you know, for them, like sometimes we forget what society has become because as Muslims, we live in a bubble.
Yeah.
You know, the concept of brotherhood, you know, the concept of sisterhood, the love that's shared between Muslims. It's very easy to forget that non-Muslims don't have this, especially with the breakdown of societal relationships.
Yes.
And people are becoming more and more isolated.
Right.
You know, so people are living by themselves. They're not seeing their children. They're not seeing their parents. They're not seeing their siblings. And so when they see all of these people, especially when you see people that are of different colors, you know, different shades of the same color, you know, you've got different ethnicities, and they're hugging and embracing and laughing and smiling, that itself is like a real powerful image. You know, it draws people to that kind of environment, and they ask what's going on here.
Yeah.
And so when they see that, oh, this is a masjid, this is a mosque, you know, that inquisitiveness, they want to step inside, you know, they want to have a look, they might want to speak to someone, and so slowly but surely you find that you know, if they don't become a Muslim, they quickly become a friend of the Muslims through that lived experience.
So if, for example, I don't know, someone like that lady who saw that brotherhood outside the mosque and, you know, people hugging each other and, you know, there's sort of community feel. So if she entered the mosque and wanted to ask questions about Islam, like what would happen next?
Yeah, so I think that's going back to your initial question. So the role that the masjid plays, so our doors are always open.
Really?
Yeah, from Dhuhr until Isha. So we open the doors half an hour before Dhuhr time, and we close them half an hour to 45 minutes, depending if there's a class until the class ends.
Yeah.
If there isn't a class, then after the salah.
Which is quite odd, by the way, because often the masjids are open just for the salah
Prayer,
time.
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I had an experience myself.
Yeah.
So I was on my graduation, actually, I took my mother and father.
Yeah.
And so we were looking for a masjid to pray. My mother isn't a Muslim, so we were looking for a masjid to pray.
Yeah.
And I saw there's a masjid on Soho Street. I forget the name of the road. So I went, knocked on the door, and there's someone inside refusing to open the doors,
Really?
you know, to pray.
Really?
And I had my mother with me, and she saw I was annoyed. And I was thinking, you know, for da'wah, this is really bad.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, it's a place of worship, and you're not allowing people to come inside. And on a street like that,
Yeah.
you know, I can imagine, though, there are security risks, things like that,
Yeah.
you know, which is another issue, because to keep your doors open, it requires resources, you know, those that are going to be in the masjid, security, you know, finances. But so the doors are open anyway, and someone can just come in and say, I'd like to talk to someone about Islam, and they're taken to the Imam, and it's given priority. So unless there is a meeting taking place, like, because we offer counseling sessions, marital services, things like that. So unless there is a meeting or a lesson taking place, then they'll be seen basically on the spot. And so then sit down, talk to them, etc. And we give them, you know, a Quran book. Someone donates I think it's the Oxford Printing Press copy of the Quran.
Is this Abdul Halim translation?
No, it's a new translation.
I think I've come across it.
It's a paperback. I forget the translator, to be honest.
Yeah.
But we offer that, and we have various books that we offer.
Yeah.
And so the masjid is always open for non-Muslims.
Yeah.
We also hold, we just had an Eid dinner for reverts, and we encourage them to bring their families.
Right.
We hold outreach programs. So, for example, it might be like, you know, with organizations that are involved in the local community.
Yeah.
We host them, and we open those up to discussion to the community, Muslim and non-Muslim.
Right.
So, an example, we've held events with Citizens UK over the last few years, whether it's about the housing issue, you know, tackling issues of immigration, helping you know, new migrants, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And so non-Muslims come to those events, and they see, you know, the Muslims, and they hear from the Muslims, and they meet Muslims, and so that as well is like a door for them to kind of look into the world of the mosque and the Muslim community.
Yeah. Imam Ashraf, I'm going to ask about the elephant in the room. And, you know, feel free to say to me this is, a nonsensical question, but is there a relationship between especially young men and women becoming Muslim, or young men becoming Muslim, and the YouTube influencer Andrew Tate and him embracing Islam?
Yeah. So I think to say no would be incorrect, and to say to make it a major reason, I think it would also be incorrect.
Okay.
But I do believe that his Islam has had an impact
Really?
on young men.
Yeah.
Because, and I think if you get into that conversation, you have to get into the conversation of what's happening in society.
Right.
And I think what's happening in society is more impactful. I mean, if you look to why he became Muslim, Andrew Tate, it's the direction society's heading to.
Social reasons.
Yeah, and I think more so the like if you just look at the gender issues, the whole the LGBT issues.
Yeah.
So these issues are driving a wedge through society.
Right.
And so when those that are deemed to be on the right see how black and white Islam is on certain fronts, they incline towards it, and especially for young men today, because young men, I think it's becoming increasingly more difficult for a young man to kind of find himself in a society which is basically erasing, feminizing and erasing what it means to be a man. And it's been going on for a long time.
Yeah.
And so Islam, it's not that they come to Islam because Islam is a very kind of macho-centric way of life, but it's very black and white in these areas. Like a man is a man and a woman is a woman.
Right.
And we have a framework which makes these things clear.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, we had a lady bring her daughter to the masjid. A non-Muslim lady brought her daughter to the masjid and said, I want my daughter to become a Muslim.
A non-Muslim
lady.
Really?
Yeah, brought her daughter to the masjid and said, I want my daughter to become Muslim.
Yeah.
Because I want her to know right from wrong, and I want her to know like what is clear, because Islam makes it clear.
Yeah.
And many of these young men, they say they're disciplined. What is it that brings you to Islam? The discipline.
Yeah.
And I believe I said to you over the phone, that's something which I was quite surprised by, because when you think about it, like I look at the Muslim community sometimes and I think,
ill-disciplined.
Yeah, we're not very disciplined,
Yeah.
When it comes to our eating habits, when it comes to sleeping
Yeah.
habits and things. But then when you look at it from the outside perspective, you have this young Muslim man or young Muslim woman doesn't drink alcohol, doesn't involve themselves in promiscuity, doesn't take drugs, is very clear on what's right, what's wrong, doesn't eat haram food. So that is quite disciplined.
Yeah.
And you said earlier in the beginning, you said like I'm surprised when I see the amount of new Muslims.
Yeah.
Like I'm surprised.
Really?
Sometimes I've caught myself looking at these young people. I'm saying like, what is it that's bringing you to Islam? Like what's happening? But then you have to realize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who is preparing and is in control of all affairs. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, yakiduna kaydan wa akidu kayda. They plot and they plan, but Allah is the one who is in control of all plots and plans ultimately. And so you see these young people coming to Islam, and you can say it's the Andrew Tate effect. You can say it's the societal effect, as in where society is heading.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who's bringing these people to Islam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is musabbibul asbab, the one who incepts the causes for these things.
So you've mentioned that young men, for example, their place and position in society is declining. You talked about, interestingly, the LGBT or the trans issue and how that's impacting, the way people perceive Islam as being right and wrong and black and white on a host of issues. What else is going on in society that, these young or old converts are experiencing that pushes them towards Islam?
I think the other issue, which I think is a very important issue, is the realization that there is no happiness to be found in material possessions or consumerism,
really.
Capitalism.
Yeah.
People are realizing, people here, the poorest of the poor is somewhat wealthy in comparison to poor nations, inhabitants of poor nations. And so people here really do experience the best that this life has to offer. Even the poorest of the poor person or people here, they go to a local shop and they can buy, various meats. They can buy, fish. They can buy summer fruits in the winter fruits in the summer, and so everything that this life has to offer has offered itself to people that live here, and so they're left wondering, like, what else? There's still a hole inside, and so they start looking. There's an Italian gentleman. He came to the masjid and he became Muslim. And I was speaking to him, asking him what is it that led to your Islam? And he said, I've been looking for a long time. He said, I've been looking for a long time. He said, I went to Rome. I spoke to priests, and a colleague of his who works in his workplace, he works in the hospital in Lewisham, handed him an Italian Quran. And he said, I started to read it and I realized this is what I've been looking for. And so he became Muslim, So I think it's a whole kind of mixture of things. You have the issue of society, you have the issue of consumerism, capitalism, you have the mixing with the masses. And I think there's a point to consider here for us as Muslims moving forward. The Sahaba, when they became Muslim, and Islam started to spread its wings left and right, east and west. The Sahaba had to kind of, drive their way through those lands. The Tabi'een, they had to drive their way through those lands. They came up against institutions that did not want the masses to hear the message of Islam. Whether they knew what Islam was or they didn't know what Islam was, they were putting up a barrier between the people that they controlled or governed and Islam. That barrier isn't here for us today. We are living amongst the people. We're living amongst the people. And so we have the opportunity to show people what Islam is, to really show them what Islam is. And when people do that, people enter into Islam. When the Muslims do that, people enter into Islam. We have Muhammad Salah, another example. People became Muslim because of his sujood and seeing him read the Quran. Khabib in UFC. And they're examples of ihsan. If you do what you do with ihsan and you openly show people that I am a proud Muslim, people are going to incline towards Islam. Muhammad Ali, perhaps the best of examples. How many people became Muslim through Muhammad Ali, indirectly, because they saw, I remember I heard a comedian saying, if I didn't drink alcohol and I didn't take drugs and I didn't sleep around, I'll become the heavyweight champion of the world too. So he's noticing it's the discipline of Islam which has led to this man's success, rahimahullah. I think Malcolm X, another example. We had a young Portuguese man, he took his Shahada last week, and he actually said Malcolm X played a major role in my Islam, reading about Malcolm X and reading about the changes he went through. So I think the main reason for people coming to Islam is their interaction with Muslims, but as well, realizing that this dunya, it's not what it's made out to be, that realization. So I think those are probably some of the key areas.
How much rebuilding is required once someone becomes a Muslim? So you said, you've got people who may be dissatisfied with, let's call it Western society, dissatisfied with consumerism, with gender relations, with the position of men and women. All of this is there. But of course, like all of us actually, but maybe more so for someone who hasn't been brought up in a Muslim family, they're going to have baggage. They're going to see the world, maybe, politically, economically, even socially, they're going to see the world from a particular perspective.
Yeah, definitely.
How much rebuilding needs to happen for someone who comes to Islam?
I mean, I think it's a big question, and you can look at it from multiple angles, because you could apply the same question to Muslims that are born and raised in the West, or Muslims that came over to the West at a young age.
True.
If you live in a sick society, you're definitely going to have that sickness, or you're going to have some of the sickness at least. And the lockdown period kind of reminded me of that, because we were wearing masks, and for those of us that were, for those of us that weren't, we were still keeping our distances. We were taking precautions to protect ourselves from these material, even though we can't see them, but they're still material, tangible kind of illnesses and sicknesses. But we don't approach the immaterial, the spiritual sicknesses in the same way. And so for I think many of the issues of Muslims in the West, whether new Muslims or born Muslims, they go back to the point that you've highlighted. if you really, go deep into the issue, it comes down to the baggage that we carry with ourselves. So you have those that are on the kind of like, let's call it, I don't know what term to use, to be honest, because things are not as straightforward as the terms allude to being. But if we say those that are on the left, those that are on the right, you find often it's the baggage that has been brought with them into Islam, or their experiences. For example, if you look at feminism was a reaction to the oppression of women in the West, really. And now the if you want to call it the red pill movement, it's a reaction to the extreme, feminism. And probably in 50, 60, 70 years time, there'll be another kind of reaction to the red pill movement. And Islam, the purpose behind Islam is to moderate all of that, to bring you into this middle ground where things are not determined by your lived experience, your interpretation of life. Things are determined for you by your creator. And so when new Muslims come to Islam, if you look at it from that perspective, there's a whole lot of work to do. But at the same time, this morning, we have a class for, it's like a foundational class in Islam.
For reverts.
It's open to all.
Okay.
But there are some revert sisters that attend. And so we were having a discussion about polygamy. And polygamy is, of course, a controversial issue. And it was the revert sisters that were more accepting of polygamy. There were a few sisters that were born into Islam that were accepting of it, but the revert sisters that were more accepting of polygamy than those that were born into Islam. Why? Because of the you could say the cultural baggage that comes with being a born Muslim. So and if you look at the Sahaba, the way that the Sahaba approached Islam, they approached Islam with an inquisitiveness about their culture and Islam and the clash between the two. And so the culture that the Sahaba developed was a culture which was refined by the framework and the principles of Islam. And that's what makes Islam so amazing. Islam is principle based. It's not directives. It's not straightforward. Do this, don't do this. Wear this, don't wear that. It's principles. And so you can see that taking place amongst reverts, amongst Muslims born here, where there's a British Islam emerging. Many people don't like that term, but there is a British Islam emerging. I don't mean a politically British Islam. I mean a culturally British Islam. And so the reverts have a major part to play in what's happening.
Well, let me ask you about that culture, because of course, all the reverts I know, all those who became Muslim, 20 maybe years ago, they've adopted cultural traits. Because is there really a British culture? I mean, I know it's a sore point, but they've adopted, sometimes even more so than you or I. They've adopted, cultural traits from Pakistan or from the Arab world. Within time, they're eating Arab food or eating, the best food in the world, curries, Indian food, of course. And so they change their culture. Is that a problem from a long-term dawah perspective in your mind?
I don't think it's a problem. I think at the end of the day, the change, the cultural development that's going to happen in the UK is going to be an organic one. But I think we as Muslims that are, those that come from, what's the word? Majority Muslim communities. I think we have to be wary of what we try to push as being, Islam. So if a person comes to the masjid and they're wearing, loose clothing, loose trousers, shirt, things like that, it would be wrong to say, oh, you have to wear a thobe now to be practicing. Or for sisters even, if a sister's not wearing an abaya, does that mean she's not practicing Islam? And I think that this question spills into the question of, what is our role here as Muslims? And the clash that sometimes emerges from the various directions that we as Muslims are taking. On a political or within the political arena, we're taking the the minority rights direction, and sometimes the language can be quite ethnocentric, perhaps. On the ground, in certain places, we're taking a da'wi perspective, and so the language to those that are in the political arena can come across perhaps as apologetic. So it's like I think we have to be aware of those issues. And I think the for a new Muslim, when they adopt the culture of Pakistani culture, Indian culture, Bengali culture, Arab culture, Somali culture, whichever culture it is.
Yeah.
I think that's more the kind of organic outcome of the new environment that they find themselves in. But I think that's changing as well. I think that's changing as well, because now, for example, if you ask a young Muslim born and raised in the UK what type of foods they would prefer to eat, they would prefer to eat, Western foods. If you look at the clothing that people are starting to wear now, Western clothing, haircuts, speech, all of these things. So I think it's a mutual exchange. But I think there is a lot to kind of think about when it comes to the culture and new Muslims and the culture that new Muslims adopt. And perhaps it's also related to the ethnicity of the individuals that embrace Islam, because I believe that certain ethnic groups, they have more, what's the word? Their culture is clearer. Their cultural identity is clearer. And whereas certain groups, they're more, maybe they more adaptable to other cultures. And, so it's like, for example, would you see a Pakistani man dressing like, a Somali man? Or a Somali man dressing like a Pakistani man? Very rarely. Whereas, for example, you might see someone that comes from another culture. They're very adaptable. They'll happily wear the clothing of another culture, another people. So I think it's all, to a degree, there is some subjectivity involved.
I mean, I can imagine that maybe, I get from time to time contacts from non-Muslims who leave comments saying that, we really enjoy your show when we watch it. They're non-Muslims, right? But they find some solace in the speakers and in the discussions that are taking place. Now, if a non-Muslim was to think about becoming a Muslim, one of the things I would imagine, and I could be wrong here, one of the things they may worry about is just the amount of rules. Christianity doesn't have those rules anymore. They don't, you just have to believe in Jesus and that's it, right? But Islam does have, whether it's, the known rules about not drinking alcohol and praying 5 times a day, but also, abstaining from riba, from interest-based loans, and even language and the way a Muslim speaks. One needs to moderate one's tone. One needs to look after parents. These are very detailed rules that come in the Ahkam Sharia. So they may worry about just the amount of rules. I mean, from your experience, how easy has it been for converts to Islam, especially those young converts, to embrace these rules of Islam?
So, I mean, at the Masjid, we always tell them, take your time. If you feel that you can't pray 5 times a day, pray, once, twice, however many times you feel that you can in the moment. There have been sisters where, they've pulled out the full hijab, niqab, and they've been told, slow down. Take it slowly, work up, because it's the inside that leads to the external, development. And if you rush with the external kind of application, it can lead to issues internally. And so it depends on the individual. But we've had young brothers and sisters, they become Muslim today, they're praying 5 times a day tomorrow. We had young brothers they became Muslim in Ramadan, prayed Taraweeh every night.
And they
fasting. They were fasting prior to becoming Muslim. Most of them were fasting prior to becoming Muslim. And then we've had others where it's difficult. What's prevented them from entering into Islam is exactly that, the rules. I had a conversation with a brother, now a brother, alhamdulillah, and his issue was that he is a perfectionist, and he doesn't like to apply himself to something unless he can perfect it and do it to the best of his ability. And so we spoke and kind of came to the conclusion, you don't have to be perfect. Take that first step and take it easy with yourself. And he took his shahada within 10 minutes of that conversation. So it's like it depends on the individual. And also as well, you'll be surprised to hear that many non-Muslim parents are very helpful. They really kind of go out of their way to help the young people that become Muslim.
Really?
Yeah, we had.
So do they embrace it? Do they like it? Because we used to hear, in my era, my generation, many converts, reverts to Islam would struggle with their families. So you're saying the opposite here.
I mean, we've seen both.
Okay.
And so I've seen, for example, there was a particular individual. who came from a particular background, and you find that certain backgrounds are more difficult when it comes to members of their families becoming Muslim due to religious inclinations, beliefs.
If they've got strong religious beliefs.
Exactly, and certain religions as well, I found. And so a particular individual became Muslim and they were hiding it from their family. I mean, I've met many young people. They ask, can I pray in my room? One young person said, I can't avoid eating pork in my household. What do I do? And they're young, you know, you perhaps might have a viewer who'll say they should leave the house kind of thing. You know, like the online world is very
black and white.
You know, Islam comes first. It's very easy to say, but when you're 15 years old, you know, and you love your mother, you love your father, etc. So they were advised, like, stay away from it as much as possible. And if you cannot avoid it, then, you know, فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ, until you develop that confidence in your Islam and in your ability to say to your parents, I'm a Muslim. And so sometimes that might take a few years. A particular individual, a young lady, her parents, she was worried about telling her parents, and so she was putting the hijab on and stuff like that as soon as she would leave the house. But before she gets into the house, she would take it all off. And so she was advised, dress in a way which you don't have to kind of like, you know, change your identity inside the house or outside the house, because otherwise it could cause problems for yourself. Her parents were very worried about her. And we met with one of her parents, and, you know, he became much more open to the idea. You know, his heart softened. Now, you know, alhamdulillah, things are much easier for that particular person. Young brother, he had to pray in his room. You know, he couldn't pray all the time, keeping it from his parents. I mean, you have both. But we've also seen, like, there's a young English brother, his mother and father, very, very facilitating.
Really?
You know, very facilitating. There's another young brother, I spoke to his mother multiple times, and his mother was phoning up and saying, can my son do this? Because my son seems to be, you know, having a misunderstanding here. Like, she was reading into
clarifying
Islam.
the rules.
Yeah, she's reading into Islam.
Yeah.
And can you speak to my son about this issue, please?
Yeah.
You know, so you'll find that the parents are many parents, they will say, we're not going to eat haram meat anymore, we'll change the meat. So, you know, there's halal meats in the fridge, in the freezer. So it's like, depends on the individual, but and depends on the household. But generally speaking, I think now there's a more welcoming stance towards young people that are becoming Muslim.
Because they can see discipline in their child, or
that's one thing. So there is a particular individual, and their parents noted, like, you know, we see a real change.
Really?
You know, and when they're having issues with their you know, their child, although they're not a child, you know, they'll call up, can you speak to my son about this issue?
So they've got someone who now can help discipline their child if the child is okay.
And not, I wouldn't say discipline, but more advice.
Advice.
But we also, we do try to, especially Imam Shakil, he tries to go out of his way to involve the parents, you know, to involve the parents in any celebrations, you know, to bring the parents into the masjid. And so we try to develop that relationship with the family as well as the individual, because they're the ones that are going to be the cause for people to become Muslim. And generally speaking, there is a trend when a person becomes a Muslim, others within that family tend to become Muslim too, whether it's the same year, a few years down the line. You know, many young people I've spoken to, they'll say, oh, my brother became Muslim a few years ago, you know, my sister became Muslim, things like that.
I mean, there is a misunderstanding maybe, or a misnomer amongst non-Muslims that people become Muslim primarily through marriage. They want to marry a Muslim, and so they convert in order to get their marriage done. I mean, how much of that is for you?
I mean, like, we have seen, you know, a person will come to
I'm not saying that's wrong.
That's what so we've seen a person will come to the masjid and they take the shahada, and then the following week they're booking a nikah. So you can kind of, you know, you can guess that this has been arranged. But if that's how Islam is going to enter the person's heart, then alhamdulillah, you know, it's a form of da'wah. And generally speaking, when a person enters into Islam, they don't leave it, you know. So it's like, it may take them some time to develop that Islam, to develop the Iman, but it becomes a mainstay in their life.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that. So from your experience, I mean, subhanAllah, you've had lots of conversions to Islam, not just in Ramadan, lots of reversions, but also, over the years. I mean, how many of those stay Muslim? I mean, do you find that there's the odd few or even a good number who may leave Islam after a few months or years?
So the only person that comes to mind that I've heard left Islam, they mentioned that they entered into Islam for the wrong reason, basically.
Okay.
And other than that, I haven't really, I haven't come across someone that's left Islam.
Right.
I mean, they may waver in their Islam, but I haven't come across someone who's entered into Islam and then a few years down the line said, no, it was a mistake.
Right.
It's you see, like, they waver, maybe up and down. Except for those, I mean, there are lots of reverts that are studying, like in Lewisham now, we have a large, when I say large, I mean in relation to other areas, community of reverts who are studying seriously, memorizing the Quran, studying the Arabic language, studying fiqh.
Really?
So alhamdulillah, we have a few who have studied in Egypt for a few years.
Really?
So there are, I mean, a young brother, he became Muslim, I think, a few years ago. Now, he's got a Quran teacher, he's proficient in his recitation of the Quran.
Mashallah.
We have a particular young brother, he became Muslim, I think, 3 or 4 years ago now, maybe 3 years ago. And we have an Arabic class weekly. He's the most advanced student in the Arabic class. And it's been going on for 2 years. And like he can actually break down the grammar of Arabic sentences. He can translate, basic texts. He could even hold a basic conversation in Arabic, and he was teaching those who entered into those who were born Muslim some of the basics of Arabic grammar. That's how seriously he took it. So I've seen that side, but I haven't seen a side where people leave Islam.
Really?
I've seen it's usually an upwards trajectory for those that become Muslim.
What impact does this have on Muslims who have been Muslims all their life? I mean, does it impact their own observance of Islam?
Definitely, it's inspirational.
Really?
A friend of mine who is a revert, he came to the Masjid and he was studying Islam in Medina, so we were there at the same time, and he recited some Quran, and one of the Imams was shocked, said, when I heard his recitation, and this is from someone who entered into Islam, it's definitely inspirational, and it should be, and it should also make those who are born into Islam appreciate the gift that they've been given. When you see an individual who has been looking for something their entire life and find it and take it seriously, it should make you question, why am I not taking this seriously? Something that I've been, born with, I've been gifted with. And it is a shame, when you have someone who became Muslim 2 years ago who can now recite the Quran better than someone who's been a Muslim their whole life. What excuse do you have? This person has to struggle and strive to learn the language, to learn how to recite. So if they can do it, then why can't those that are born into Islam do it? So definitely it's inspirational. And for myself, like so as an Imam, you deal with things that will take you up to the sky with positivity, and then you deal with things that will bring you straight back down. So it's like being around new Muslims, seeing them embrace Islam, listening to them, seeing them take it seriously. That positivity, it really is necessary for myself, because the other side is dealing with, like high divorce rates, mental health issues, the issues of drugs and alcohol and the societal ills generally that are affecting everyone else. So that's a real source of positivity for us in these difficult times, alhamdulillah.
I want to ask about, again, this is more of I know actually you brothers at Lewisham Mosque, you do not shy away from talking about societal and political issues. And I've noticed that for a long time. In fact, I mean, it's worth noting for our viewers. I mean, Imam Shakil in particular, I mean, this is before you became an Imam, but I think even after, when you became Imam, Lewisham Mosque was known for being a place where you spoke about political issues, and you made it very clear that the war on terror was unjust. And, and many a time, I know that the media depicted Lewisham Mosque in a very negative light, unfairly, because of that. But you continued, and there was a no compromise, but also it was done in a very good way. It wasn't sort of, it didn't, as you can see from the number of people converting to Islam, it didn't put up barriers.
Us versus them.
Yes, us versus them. But there is this fear amongst the non-Muslims, especially when a young person becomes Muslim, that they're going to become susceptible to extremism in inverted commas. And of course, extremism could mean many things to many people. But there was at least, back in the heyday of ISIS, many reverts did leave Britain, France, many of the European countries, America, Canada, and ended up, disproportionately probably, ended up becoming members of this group. And that fear exists. I mean, have you, how do you deal with this fear that may still persist amongst non-Muslim parents?
So I think lately that fear isn't as present and as prevalent as it used to be.
Really?
But I think the way to deal with that fear, and the way perhaps we have been dealing with that fear in Lewisham, is to tackle it head on.
Okay.
Because and this is where you get into that kind of black and white water, where everything is either you're for or against, either you're with us or you're against us kind of mentality online. It's like, okay, you're speaking out against if you use the term extremism as a Muslim, oh, you must be an apologetic. If you use the term Sharia as a Muslim, oh, you must be an Islamist. And so the blessing that we have on the ground is that the common Muslims and non-Muslims, they don't really fall victim to those kind of narratives. You can use the term extremism, and people are not going to naturally assume that you're an apologetic Muslim. You can talk about being British, and people are not going to say, oh, you're one of those, a moderate kind of, this impression that people have. You can talk about Sharia, you can talk about the importance of a moral framework, and people are not going to feel threatened. And so that's the approach we've had: transparent, honest, and being transparent and honest to the book, the Quran, and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and the 4 schools of fiqh, the frameworks provided for us by the great Imams of the past. That's the best approach, because if you try to present Islam in any other way, either on this side or that side, people are going to find out. And so the best thing to, yes, for example, like, Sharia, yes, the Muslim should want to see the Sharia being implemented, etc. But does that mean that I'm aspiring towards, implementing Sharia in my locality where I'm living as a minority under a government which has it? No, it doesn't. So it's about the articulation of the truth, the honest truth, the unadulterated truth, but in a way which is relevant to the people, and in a way which is perhaps understandable. I think that's the. And if you like, for example, if you listen to some of the khutbahs from Lewisham, you'll find some of the khutbahs are very critical of the British government, very critical of foreign policy, but at the same time, very critical of the Muslim community. Like we don't shy away from being critical of the Muslim community, as well as being critical of the British government, or foreign policy, or even, Muslim states, if you like to call them that. Why? Because the framework is there. So if you see the Muslim community involved in that which they shouldn't be involved in, you have to speak the truth. If you see the British government involved in that which is morally unjust, you have to speak the truth. And when you base your approach on a framework which has been formulated for you by the great scholars of the past, that has been taken from the understanding of the Sahaba, taken from the Prophet, from the Quran, then you're going to have a balanced approach. And I think that's where you find people either fell into the left or fell into the right, the extreme side here or the extreme side there, when they branched away from the middle ground provided for us by the scholars of the past. It's when we opened up the Quran and the Sunnah to our own kind of interpretations, or when you have a person who is not fit to interpret the Quran or the Sunnah or the words of the scholars of the past, trying to do so. And that's perhaps the result of the printing press, and perhaps maybe slightly worse than the printing press, digital media, where a person has access to words that were previously only restricted to scholars or students of knowledge who had the capacity to understand these words. They would understand the context and so on and so forth. And so that's been our approach. For example, the issue of ISIS or Daesh, as known in the Arab world, you tackle the wrong. And likewise, on this side, politics, etc., you tackle the wrong. But sometimes as well, on this side, you have to understand the context. So politically, yes, we might be against certain things, but you also have to understand the context of where you're living. You're living in the UK. You have to understand that context before you speak about these issues.
Yeah. Can I ask you about, because of course, a lot of what we've discussed today is really about the role of the masjid and how it needs to be at the center of the community. Now, Lewisham Mosque is quite exceptional, I would say. Okay, you have said that, the Shahada are not just, you don't just find it in Lewisham Mosque,
Yeah.
and of course, but, I've noticed on a sort of long-term trajectory, Lewisham Mosque is doing some really good work, not just
100%.
amongst, non-Muslims to bring them to Islam, but also in the Muslim community. Now, again, forgive me for putting it like this, but, it's a simple mosque. I mean, if you look at I would urge my viewers to just view the mosque. It's maybe someone sitting in Texas would think this is like one of these big grand mosques with lots of minarets and domes. Right? It's a very simple center.
Used to be a nightclub.
Used to be a nightclub, really. So it's a very simple place. Yet the Imam in the mosque, the as you said, the aura that it projects is amazing. So what is it about the masjid you feel, or Lewisham Masjid, that needs to be replicated in other masajids?
Yeah, so I would agree with you definitely, and I don't say this with a bias because I'm from the Masjid Lewisham, but I would definitely say that the Lewisham Islamic Centre is unlike the masajid that I have seen anyway in the UK. And most people that come to the masjid will say the same thing. Yeah. The diversity.
I mean, just to say, I went on Google reviews, the reviews, and subhanAllah, okay, the number of people who talked about, the buzzwords I think I remember was community, brotherhood, sisterhood, feeling belonging. These were the terms used consistently by those who reviewed it. Even those, by the way, who said, I passed by the masjid one day and, I came in and this is the feeling I got. Sorry, continue.
No, so those words, as you highlighted, with Lewisham, I remember a brother, he came from America, he was doing a tour and he came from a particular background and he came to Lewisham and he was upset that this was the last masjid that he came to because he said, like every other masjid I've been to, there's been a particular kind of ethnic background that you find is the predominant group, whereas in Lewisham you can't really say that. You have like East African, West African, Central African, North African, you have Southeast Asian, you have European, you have Caribbean, you have English, you have French, like there's a whole array of different colors and languages, etc. And I think that's one of the things that kind of makes it unique. And I would say in short, it's the concentration on the people inside the masjid rather than the masjid itself, and I think that's one of the biggest problems that we have in our time. We focus on the minaret, on the dome, we focus on the buildings, on the carpet, but we don't focus on the individuals. It's like, running a business. If you have, the best kind of facilities available, but you hire a CEO who is not competent in his job, the facilities are worthless. Likewise, if you have a hall that can hold 20,000 people, but you don't have the individuals that have the capacity to lead those individuals or the capacity to utilize the facilities available, then what use is the building? And if you go back to the Prophet ﷺ's masjid, the floor was made of earth, no carpet, the pillars were palm trees, and the roofs palm leaves. But yet the Prophet ﷺ raised, took Islam into Africa, took Islam into Southeast Asia, took Islam to the rest of the world. And it's the men and women that need to be the focus. I remember hearing, I think Sheikh Zahir Mahmoud, he said, if you pay peanuts, don't complain when you get a monkey. And that's the blatant and honest reality.
So the wage of the Imam, for example.
That's a whole another, but yeah, so for example, like if you want, there's two issues here, because people assume, okay, if you're working in the Islamic arena, it has to be fi sabilillah. I agree with that, ideally, but you cannot work fi sabilillah and have a wife and children. If you're saying the Imam should not have, a wife and children, that's something else. But the reality is, if you have a wife and children in this society, you need to feed them. And if you're going to be calling to traditional gender roles. You're going to be calling to living like, you know, Muslims and like the Prophet ﷺ, like the Sahaba. Then how can you expect the Imam to not live like, you know, a man and be able to provide for his family? So if you want qualified members of the community, i.e. those that work there and those that have the skills and the capacity to really make a change, then yeah, you have to pay them. That's one aspect. The other aspect is also, I think, the context of the Imams and the understanding of the Imams. Many Imams, the only kind of context that they have is the masjid, the home, and maybe the supplementary school that they may teach in, etc. And many Imams were raised like that, raised in very conservative, you know, predominantly Muslim communities where they may not have an understanding of the world outside of their own community. That can have an impact as well. Language, you know, language barrier. So if the language is not relevant, as we mentioned, that can have an impact. You know, being aware of the social issues and things like that. So all of these, when you put them all together, if you have Imams that are capable of doing their jobs, you know, they are qualified enough to do their jobs well, Islamically, and also in the other skills necessary, be it counseling, be it mediation, you know, be it you know, leadership skills. You have other staff members, because it's not only the Imams. You know, I would say, for example, at Lewisham, the center coordinator, you could say, you know, those that are kind of at the heart, the admin staff, they're like the heart.
Right.
Without them, a lot will disappear. The volunteers, you know, a lot of the work done is done by volunteers. They're not even being paid, you know. So everyone has to be on board and the vision has to be there. And I think that's kind of like maybe the crux of the issue, the layer beneath the other layers. What's the vision of the masjid? So if the masjid was established with a vision of being a place for prayer for our community, then unless that changes, the masjid is not going to cater beyond that. But if the vision behind the masjid is we want to bring Islam to the masses and we want Islam to be the future of the UK, then that's going to translate into the work that's done, the language that's used, the decisions that are made, you know, even to a degree, the clothing that will be worn. It's going to have you know, like behind every action, there's a philosophy. You know, we all have a central philosophy that dictates our actions. And so there has to be that vision. And so at Lewisham, the vision is like, we want Islam to be a mainstay in the UK. You know, like, why don't we have the aspiration of Islam being the number one religion in the UK and the religion of English and British people? That is our goal. Why is that our goal? Because we believe that Islam is best for mankind. You know, we believe we have something beautiful and we want to share it with those that haven't yet experienced it. And so when that's the vision, you know, the goal is kind of like streamlined.
So where do you stand on, you know, because I often come across Muslims who say, look, we don't really need, they don't mean we don't need converts, but, you know, or reverts. Their argument is that, you know, we have to get our own house in order first. There are too many problems within the Muslim community. How do you weigh up the work of dawah to non-Muslims and the work of dawah to Muslims?
That's a very interesting question. And I think like the premise is, you know, there's an indication there. But like, so if we say, we don't really need new Muslims and we need to get our house in order before we kind of invite other people in. Who said that the house belongs to us in the first place?
Right.
You know, who decides who the house belongs to? And this is one of the issues of many masajid, the assumption that Islam belongs to a certain people, and it leads to a cultural monopolization of Islam. You know, and that's totally wrong. Our role, it's not a role, it's a fard. You know, our responsibility is to bring Islam to those that we interact with. You know, that's our responsibility. And it's something that we may be questioned for on Yawm al-Qiyamah. And so we don't really have the choice of asking whether or not we should be bringing people to Islam. We have to bring people to Islam. And if we want Islam to really kind of take off in the UK, who is it that's going to take it there? Who is it that's going to take Islam to that next level where Islam is entering into the homes of like native British people, if you like, you know, English people, etc. Wherever Islam goes, Islam takes on the flavor of the land. You know, you go to Africa, Islam looks African. You go to the Middle East, Islam looks Middle Eastern. You go to Southeast Asia, it looks Southeast Asian. In Europe, what where is Islam going? What is it going to look like? What is it going to sound like? It's not going to sound like the minority communities that may have brought Islam here. It will sound like the people that live here. It will look like the people that live here. And so we don't really have the right to answer that question.
Yeah.
I don't think it's fair for us to say, let's get our house in order first. So we should let people die and go to Jahannam whilst we're trying to get our house in order.
Yeah.
And how long is that going to take? We've been waiting for a long time. We've been here for how many generations now? So I think it should be more, what is our main goal and responsibility? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't need us anyway. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to establish Islam and give aid to Islam, and Islam is the future without a shadow of a doubt. Yes. Like nowadays you see those that they've historically been anti-Islamic, anti-Muslim, and they're even saying Islam is perhaps the last vanguard against the degeneracy that we see now taking a grip of society. And so we would be foolish to not kind of utilize this opportunity and say, yeah, look, this is the last vanguard. Here, jump onto the boat and save yourself from the floods that are going to soon make their way into the average household.
Imam Ashraf, I spoke to a friend of mine who's a professor, university lecturer, and he's got alhamdulillah, he's very grounded. His view is that he likes to interact with ordinary Muslims, people who pray in the mosque, people who've got Islamic sensitivities. But I notice, especially with this generation, there are Muslims who go to university, who become academics maybe, or who work in high occupations, in sort of city jobs, and they become alienated from the Muslim community. And it's most notable where you don't see them necessarily in the masjid, in the masajid, very often. How important is the masjid for our mindset as Muslims, for the way we comprehend our Islam?
So I think it's a very good question, and I think you can look at it from two angles. I think you can ask, how important is the masjid, but you can also ask, how important are those individuals, because they have a role to play too. Because the Imams are not going to be they're not going to be accessing the parts of society that those individuals are accessing. And likewise, those individuals are not going to be accessing the parts of society that Imams are accessing. For example, I remember I was listening to a very interesting interview with Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad. I believe it was Sami Yusuf who was interviewing him, and he was speaking about the issue of Islam and culture, and British culture and Islam and so on and so forth. And he said, that's not really my role. I'm as an academic, I'm not on the ground in those areas. So him understanding that, and seeing, where he is playing his part.
Yes.
So the Muslims on the ground interacting with the working class, Muslims on the ground interacting with the middle class, they have their role. But individuals that you've highlighted, they also have their role, a crucial role. But at the same time, the masjid is very important to them because it keeps them anchored.
Exactly.
The masjid is an anchor. And not only is it an anchor, but it's also a place that provides many societal benefits. So we're living in a time now, you'll see in the mental health care sector, many individuals now are suffering with depression, anxiety, OCDs, loneliness, isolation, things like that. And the masjid is a counter to all of those things. The masjid is a counter to all of those things. If you're seeing faces 5 times a day, or if you're working 2 times a day, you're sitting, you're interacting, you're smiling, you might go and grab a tea or a coffee with someone in between the prayers. That itself alleviates much of the suffering that the average person in these built-up societies faces today. And it also is very important because it reminds you of your purpose. It's very easy to become, as you become engrossed in this dunya, you lose your purpose, like a tree. The further rooted you become, the harder you become, and the more difficult it is for you to kind of uproot yourself and detach yourself from this dunya. But if you're constantly going to the masjid and you're seeing other people praying, reading the Quran, you're hearing the odd reminder from the Imam, that kind of keeps your heart anchored and keeps you directed, gives you that purpose. And going back to the question prior to that, if the masjid have the vision of we want Islam to, penetrate into all walks of life and all parts of society. And then you have individuals that are, from all walks of life. You have people from the working class, people from the middle class, people that are in academia, people that are perhaps in politics, and they're hearing that masjid, that's going to have a major impact, and so I think it's really important for masajid going forward to really, think, what is our vision here? If you look, for example, if I use Tower Hamlets as an example, so Tower Hamlets, the amount of masajid in Tower Hamlets, I can't count. But as I mentioned, close to where I live, there are maybe 9 different masajid. But yet, we're seeing in Lewisham one masjid, and the other masjid, which the closest masjid to Lewisham, I believe, is probably a 15-minute drive away. And then you have other masajid the other way. The masajid in that part are quite scarce, but yet you're seeing more shahadas in Lewisham, and perhaps add Brixton to that as well, than you are in Tower Hamlets. Why? Because the vision behind the masjid isn't there. There is a masjid that I frequent in East London. I would say the vision is somewhat there. Okay. And the young brothers, they have this idea of let's take Islam to people, and people are becoming Muslim there. Going back to what we were initially talking about, the development of the culture, that development of the culture. What is our purpose? Bring people to Islam. Yeah. For young Muslims to be confident and to put it onto their friends. Like, why aren't you a Muslim? Do you believe in Allah? Do you believe in the last day? Because when you have a friendship, you can have those types of conversations. Challenge people. Why? Because ultimately, if you love someone, you care for someone, you want the best for them. And so if you have friendships, if you have neighbors, and they don't have Islam, you're doing them a disservice. So for those individuals, they have a major role to play because they have access to places that the average Muslim doesn't have access to. And so Allah has granted them a real kind of opportunity there. And so for them to find a masjid and anchor themselves to that masjid is really important.
I think one final question for you. I mean, we see that although Islam is growing, alhamdulillah, and through the works of, aided by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through the works that brothers like you do at Imams like you do at Lewisham and other places in the country, we also see a political backlash against Islam. The conservative government, and even the Labour government will be the same.
Yeah.
They're very fierce against Muslims, and they don't even hide their animus towards Islam sometimes. We see that with the Home Secretary and the way she talks about Muslims and the way she talks about migrants, and it's obvious that she's really referring to Muslims here, yeah. Right? So we've seen that in British society. Are you hopeful for the future of Islam here in Britain?
So I think it's a really good question, and I'm really happy that you mentioned that point because I wanted to touch on it actually. And I think what we have to remember is that the politicians do not have access to the masses like we as Muslims do.
Right.
And so we don't really need to worry about political narratives and media narratives as long as we're doing what we should be doing on the ground. And there are instances that I can recall that prove this. The Grenfell Tower incident.
Yeah.
So we had non-Muslims on the news saying if it wasn't for the Muslims, we would have died.
So this was a tower block.
Exactly, the tower block that burned down. Yeah, caught fire. Yeah. May Allah have mercy upon those that passed away. Yeah. And during Ramadan, and so the Muslims were awake. And some Muslims, they went around knocking on their non-Muslim neighbors' doors, telling them, get out of the building, there's a massive fire. Yeah. And so they were saying, like, if it wasn't for these Muslims awake, fasting, we would have passed away, And then you had the Muslims on the ground doing all of the charity work, and the non-Muslims were recognizing that, saying, like, these people have been here, giving us food, giving us drink. That's what changes minds, And so when you have a narrative, a political narrative, which goes against the narrative on the ground, the people are going to trust those that are showing them that love and that care. And I think that's a really important, point that we need to kind of focus on as Muslims. If we do our work on the ground, we don't need to worry about the narratives that are coming from the top. But the problem that we have is that we are very restricted to our own people, like whether it's ethnically or as Muslims, we focus on our own people. We don't think too much about the non-Muslims. What can we do to kind of show non-Muslims what Islam is? And also just being good humans. You know, like now with the rise of living costs and so on and so forth, we have some very wealthy Muslims, alhamdulillah. What are they doing to alleviate the issues that people are suffering from? You know, are they going into non-Muslim communities and giving charity? And if they aren't, why not? You know, one of the categories of zakah is ta'liful qulub, mu'allafatul qulub. Although some of the fuqaha, they would, you know, suggest that it's no longer relevant, but it's there, you know, in the Quran. So if we say, okay, not with zakah money, but sadaqah, so if we focus on the ground and we do our job properly on the ground, then we don't have to worry about what's happening in politics. And also, we have to realize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised to aid Islam, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses men and women to do so. And so the question that we should ask ourselves is not really what will the future of Islam be like in Britain, but what part do I have to play in the future of Islam in Britain? Because we can't worry too much about the consequences, you know, or the outcome. You know, for us as Muslims, the outcome is irrelevant. It's the part that we played on the way to the outcome. You know, if I am calling to Islam and I'm trying to show people what the truth is, but people refuse to accept Islam, and I'm kicked out of the land that I reside in, I was still successful, you know, just like Nuh alayhi salam. And if I call people to Islam and people embrace Islam and so on and so forth, and it becomes a Muslim population, the success isn't any greater than the first success, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't take us into account for the outcome, rather for the effort and the action that we take on the way to the outcome. But in saying that, I'm very hopeful for the future of Islam in Britain. In fact, I believe and I hope that the future of Britain is with Islam, and not only Britain, but Europe. I believe that Islam has a major part to play in the future of Europe. And I really want to see the young brothers and sisters, although I'm not too old myself, but like, you know, the younger generation take it upon themselves and really, you know, take this kind of responsibility upon themselves and study the deen, and take the deen where it needs to be taken. But on that point, if you don't mind, if we did just touch upon an area, which is the role of social media.
Yeah.
And I think individuals that use the social media platform have to be very conscious of the way that they use it. So for example, we had new Muslims and they were advised, listen to this individual, come back a few weeks later and say, oh, everyone online is saying this person is like this person is like that, this person, so where do I go? Alhamdulillah, they have a place they can come back to and ask for guidance. But when you have a new Muslim or a newly practicing Muslim and they go online, they find someone that's really helping them. Okay, maybe they have some mistakes, but what human doesn't have mistakes? You know, which man hasn't made a mistake in his or her life, man or woman? And also, you know, you find even the prophets made mistakes that didn't affect the revelation. You know, so you have an individual listening to this person, the person is benefiting them, the person is helping them along their way to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and someone throws a wrench in the whole system and says, no, this person is a deviant, this person is this. They've probably never heard the term mubtadi' in their life. You know, they a new trend where you have individuals referring to other Muslims. Like a Muslim who fears Allah would never refer to another Muslim with certain terms. You know, I won't mention the terms because I don't want to make it about other people. But a Muslim who fears Allah would never use certain terms to describe another Muslim, even if they differ with them. And when you have new Muslims who came to Islam for one truth and they find the Muslims are fighting online and you know, using despicable terms, and it can be very off-putting. You know, and so those that use social media really need to think about the way that the language that they utilize. Language, like a word can start a war and a word can end a war. A word can start a marriage and a word can end a marriage. But yet we're so loose with our tongues online. And it can also be those that are in the political arena. Sometimes the language that they use can be quite inflammatory. And the reason behind that is because they're speaking to a particular audience. You know, in their mind, they're addressing a certain audience. But the words that we use online are open to everyone. You know, everyone has access to those words. And so the online world can play a major part, positive or negative. And you mentioned earlier Andrew Tate. You know, the impact Andrew Tate, definitely he had an impact. You know, I believe many young men have become Muslim because of Andrew Tate. Whether you agree with Andrew Tate's views or not, it's besides the point. And in relation to the views and the actions of Andrew Tate, you know, he's a person who has become Muslim, and so we have to kind of give him that space, yes. And yeah, we can disagree with things, but to have that maturity, to have that emotional maturity, political maturity, and that intellectual maturity to understand the context, the remit within which we are working. Otherwise, it becomes very sticky and very, very quickly, and it can even lead to people leaving Islam. Some of these online debates have led to people leaving Islam. You're debating someone about an issue which is so, what's the word? Intricate, an issue of theology, aqidah, which is so intricate, it's irrelevant to the masses. And you're making that the crux of your online presence. But yet people are suffering in their homes. People are suffering with disbelief, like thinking about the way we use our time and the direction that we take as Muslims. That's going to have a major role to play in the relationship between Britain and Islam in the future, I believe.
Yeah. I mean, do you encourage many of because you obviously come across lots of young Muslims.
Yeah.
And that space, what you described there, is a phenomenon amongst young Muslims who may be ill-informed about Islam.
Yeah.
But they then take it upon themselves to be the guardian of Islam, and they attack this scholar here or there. Is that something you advise them, very early on in your interactions with them, that, be calm when it comes to interactions on social media?
Yeah, you have to be wise, because you don't want to say to a person, don't listen to this person and don't listen to that person.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, we encourage people to learn face-to-face.
Yes.
Online learning is problematic in any area, I believe. Yeah. And especially when it comes to the Islamic sciences, there's barakatul talaqi, as the ulama refer to it, as the companionship, the what happens between you and the teacher, where you take the information from the mouth of the teacher. And that's our tradition. The Prophet ﷺ took from Jibreel ﷺ, the Sahaba took from the Prophet ﷺ, all the way up until our times today. Yeah. And if you look at where the Christians went wrong, you could suggest that it was in the cutting of ties between the disciples, as they refer to them as, and the followers of Isa alayhi salam. So I advise new Muslims and newly practicing Muslims to be very careful in the way that they take information online, and we always advise them to develop a relationship with a masjid that offers face-to-face services. And again, it goes back to the importance of the masjid. The masjid is not a place of prayer alone. The masjid is a place of prayer, a place of strategy, a place of learning, a place of social interaction. The masjid it should be the heartbeat of a community. To the extent that certain communities used to build their houses around the masjid, and on that point, a sister space, the importance of a female prayer area, learning area in the masjid. And you go into the mental health issues that people are facing. The masjid can very much alleviate those issues if they provide the space of alleviation, the spiritual place for women to attend.
Yeah. Well, Imam Ashraf Dabbous, Jazakallah khair very much. It's been a fascinating discussion today. Barakallah feek. Please remember to subscribe to our social media and YouTube channels, and head over to our website thinkingmuslim.com to sign up to my weekly newsletter. Jazakallah khair.